In this video, we're going to look at what's called the spiritualist option of the time period. The first guy we'll look at is George Fox and the Quakers, and this is 1620s to 1690s. He quit being a shoe cobbler pretty young and wondered attending religious meetings, just trying to find illumination. He would study the scriptures, and he felt the various religious sects in England were wrong, and so he didn't see that anywhere in the scripture where the church was to meet in buildings. They just met in their houses. And so why do we call buildings churches? Isn't the church made up of the people? And so but he also saw that pastors who worked for a salary weren't shepherds, but rather priests, and he didn't like that. Also, hymns, the order of worship, where you first you have an opening, and then you sing 2 or 3 songs, and then you have a prayer. A set order he was against. And the lengthy, like a 45-minute sermon, the sacraments, creeds, and ministers as a whole were hindrances to the freedom of the Spirit. He was totally against Calvinism. He didn't see that view of God's election as loving. And he saw that there was a little light in everyone, so therefore pagans could be saved, he believed. And this inner light is not our intellect or conscience, natural reason, or morality, but rather it's what makes us capable to accept the presence of God. And he stayed quiet about his beliefs for many years until he finally feels like he should speak out at a Baptist meeting. So he announces these inner truths that he became to believe, and more often these urges of the Spirit came more frequently. He would just go into various church meetings and declare that the Spirit told him to announce this new spiritual vision of Christianity. So they'd throw him out, he'd get beat, he'd get stoned, but he still had a lot of followers that started following him, and they were called Children of Light, and then eventually became known as the Friends. And others saw their religious enthusiasm like that they were trembling, so they were called the Quakers. One lady, Margaret Fell, who was a widow of following this Quaker movement, she was imprisoned, and then she gets released and marries George Fox. So they both get thrown in prison repeatedly. And but they, as a whole, Fox and his followers felt that any kind of structure, a set plan for church was an obstacle, that the Spirit does not work if you have a set order of events or a plan. You just need to be ready to act on the Spirit. So the services would take place in complete silence until someone felt like they were supposed to pray or speak, and then they would do so. Men and women both would do this. They just allowed the Spirit to move them. So many that were curious would want to hear Fox speak, and so they'd show up expecting to hear him, but then he wouldn't, and they'd leave disappointed. So they didn't baptize or practice communion. They saw that these things detracted from the spiritual leading of the church, and that decisions were made collectively. They would not move on in a decision unless everyone was in agreement. They would sit in silence until the Spirit revealed the direction they should go. Many times they got in prison for blasphemy and conspiring against the government, and they would offer their freedom to be able to to serve in the military, but they refused that the only weapon they should wield are spiritual. And they would visit many meetings in Ireland, Scotland, the Caribbean, and in North America to spread their teaching. Many of the followers were persecuted for vagrancy, blasphemy, and refusing to pay tithes and rioting. Finally, in 1664, Charles II forbid any unlicensed assemblies, and of course they did not fit in that category, and they would publicly disobey this edict, and because to meet in secret would be a lie, and so they invited persecution. Many died in prison before tolerance was granted in 1689. Next, there was a Quaker by the name of William Penn. He started out as a Puritan, but then became a Quaker in 1667, and his father didn't know what to do about this fanatical son and kicked him out of the house. He ended up spending 7 months kind of in quarantine in the Tower of London, and his friends and family tried to get him released. And finally, he spent 7 years raising a family, kind of quieted down for a little bit, traveling through Europe, but then starts writing in defense of the Friends movement. He was accused of being a Catholic Jesuit, and he wanted to start this, what he called a holy experiment. The crown had owed him money, but they wouldn't pay in cash, so he took land in the colonies in the States, and it became known as Pennsylvania. He wanted to found this colony with religious freedom, and Massachusetts was extremely intolerant of various religions, and so he wanted pure religious freedom. And so he planned to buy the land from the Indians. Even though the crown was going to grant it to him, he was convinced it was the Indians' land and he was going to pay them for it. And the capital city of Philadelphia, which is known as the city of brotherly love or fraternal love. And the Friends, the Quakers, dominated the political life of the colony, Penn being the first governor, and the relations with the Indians were really good until the new leader came on board in 1756, and then they were at war with the Indians, and the Quakers moved out of the politic area, and then much of the religious tolerance that they tried to establish became embedded in the Constitution when it was written. So that is the spiritualist option of the Quakers of the same time period.